econ class, we're doing section 3, or macroeconomic measures of performance. So this basically entails 7 subcategories, the first being circular flow model, accounting for output and income, along with aggregate spending or aggregate expenditure.
Along with those 3, we'll also be covering national income concepts, real and nominal GDP, inflation and CPI, and unemployment.
And this project and video is brought to you by Danielle, myself, and Matt, the cameraman. Hope you enjoy. Alright, you guys, so today we are talking about the circular flow model, and basically, in essence, it is used by economists to show how money flows throughout our economy. And what is it comprised of? It's comprised of the private sector, which are businesses that are not government controlled, households, which include you and me, firms and other businesses, and the public sector, which are government controlled organizations and services provided, which is made up of the government itself, the foreign sector, and the rest of the world. And these two compose exports and imports, as well as national transactions. And so to give you guys a basic idea, this is what it looks like as a whole. At the top half is the resource market, and the bottom half is the product market. Households on the right, firms on the left, and the government right in the middle. We'll start off with households, which provide to the resource market labor and capital, so basically the human workforce, while the resource market provides us with income or wages. On the firm side, it provides the resource market with their own costs, and it gets from them resources to make goods and services. On the bottom half, the products, the market itself provides us with goods and services while we provide consumer spending. Firms provide the product market with goods and services to be consumed by us, and in return they get their revenue. Government in the middle, both households and firms provide it with taxes, and as contrary, the government will provide firms with subsidies and provide households or just consumers with transfer payments such as welfare. The rest of the world is outside of this model, but it is included in such that imports go out and exports come in. However, these will come into play later into GDP. And our sample question for you for this section is, without looking at the video, can you draw a correctly labeled circular flow model? And if you could pause the video now and draw it on your whiteboards, that would be great. Thank you, and we will see you at the next section. For part 2 of our econ segment, we will be talking about accounting for output and income. And so a quick note, as you all know, GDP is gross domestic product. And so 2 ways to tackle GDP are through the expenditure approach or the income approach. And the expenditure approach, which will yield aggregate expenditure, basically adds spending on all final goods and services produced during a given year. And the income approach adds earnings during the year by those who produced said output. So for example, let's say McDonald's itself is a country and all they produce is a burger. Through the expenditure approach, what you would do to measure GDP is add up all consumer spending spent towards that burger, add it up, and that will yield GDP. Through the income approach, with the same scenario, all you would have to do is add all of McDonald's earnings from what they sold through burgers, and that would yield GDP as well. So as you can see, aggregate expenditure equals GDP, which also equals aggregate income. The simple equation for GDP is C plus I plus G plus XN, where C is consumer spending, I is investment spending, G is government spending, and XN is net exports or exports minus imports. And so basically, what's counted in GDP? Well, final goods and services, which are sold to the final or end user. And what's not counted? Intermediate goods and services, which are purchased for additional processing. They are used to make the end or final product. An example would be the light bulbs that are already in place in a house up for sale. What is also not counted? Underground economy goods, which are illegal goods and services, i.e. the black market, illegal firearms, and illegal narcotics. And C, the secondhand sales or used goods which were already purchased but up for resale once again. And our sample question for you is, if Bose sells Toyota a speaker system to be put in a $25,000 Camry, and the system itself costs $1,000, assuming the car is purchased by a consumer, would $25,000 or $26,000 be added to GDP? So please pause the video and answer it as quickly as possible. Okay, so the answer to this question was $25,000 because the Bose speaker system is an intermediate good which is already implemented in the cost of the car.
So now we're going to talk about aggregate spending or aggregate expenditures, and that is really just GDP, or C plus IG plus G plus XN. So C would stand for consumption, and consumption is personal consumption expenditures, meaning like whatever you would buy at a store or a service, so getting a haircut or going to the grocery store or stuff like that. It makes up about 2/3 of our total GDP. And then IG is investments or spending on new capital goods, and this comes down to 3 broader categories, which is business investment, inventories, and household investments. Alright, so going off investments can be broken down into 3 broader categories. So business investment would be when businesses invest in capital goods. And capital goods would be like, say I'm a pizza company or I'm like a pizza joint and I'm investing in a new oven to produce more pizzas. Like it's something that'll be used multiple times throughout an extended period of time. Next we have inventories, which would be like when a producer produces like a surplus of his or her product to, say like there's a big computer boom and they sell out all of their computers in the store. They have a surplus to adjust for the amount of supply or for the demand of computers. And last we have household investments, which is kind of like a business investment, except it's more of an individual person. So it'd be like a homeowner would buy a new car or a new house, something that would be used again multiple times through an extended period of time. So next we have G, or government purchases. And government purchases is pretty much the government spending whatever money they have to like make our lives better pretty much. So if you live in like New York, they spend money on clearing the snow on roads, or building bridges, or cleaning the beaches and stuff like that. So but government purchase does not include transfer payments, because this is not spending on a good or service. It's just social security, welfare, unemployment insurance. It's like it's not physical. And then last but not least, we have net exports, which is exports minus imports. So an export is something we would ship out to the world. Say like we produce a lot of corn, so we'll ship out and sell corn to other countries. And then imports is something that we buy in, or that we take in from other countries. So like, say we take in a lot of petroleum from the Middle East. And the U.S. net exports has been negative since the 1960s, and this makes up to about -4 to -5% of our GDP in the recent years. Alright, so class, now if you could please take out your whiteboards, we're going to do a sample question. So for each one of these numbers, you're going to put down where this scenario or where this thing would go in GDP. So consumption, investment, government investment or spending, and then net exports. So number 1, buying a pizza. Number 2, furnishing your home. Number 3, buying a new factory. 4, the US buys Japanese produced cars. 5, stocks and bonds. 6, welfare benefits. And 7, building a new highway. So number 1 is consumption, number 2 is consumption, number 3 is investments, because the company is buying a capital good, number 4 is net exports, number 5 and number 6 are both not included in GDP, because they're transfer payments. Number 7 is government investment. Alright, so aggregate expenditures is also considered aggregate income, or in the same thing, GDP. So these are all kind of the same term that mean the same thing. And factor payments are paying for the 4 factors of production, which are land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So, sample question. A farmer buys a new farm and a new tractor. Which of the 4 factors of production is the farmer buying from? And now the farmer is buying from land and capital. Alright, so now GDP can be broken down into 2 categories. So nominal GDP and real GDP. So nominal GDP is when the number comes out and it's not adjusted for inflation. And then real GDP is when it is adjusted for inflation. So if you look at, say, the GDP from 2005 was, say, for 100,000, and then to the next year it was 150,000. Even though the next year might be a bigger number, it might not be actually bigger. The country might not have actually grown economically because of inflation. And to get that real GDP, use the GDP deflator, which is nominal GDP over real GDP times 100, and that'll get you a percent. So now here's a sample question. If the nominal GDP in 2010 was 30 and the real GDP compared to a base year was 25, how much is the GDP deflator? Alright, so here we have the answer. So here's the equation: GDP deflator equals nominal over real GDP times 100. And for the question, deflator equals 30 over 25 times 100. That gets you 120%. So that means that inflation that year was 20%. So the price of the dollar was increased that year. So next we're going to move on to the business cycle. So a business cycle shows the economic growth over a period of time for a country. So this is kind of what the business cycle looks like. It goes up, down, up, down, up. So when it goes up, that's an expansion period. So an expansion period is when a country is experiencing large economic growth. And then when there's always a peak at that point. And that peak is like prior to a contractionary period, which a contractionary period could be either a depression or a recession. So a depression is a severe recession, which is there's a 10% decline in GDP. And then a recession is just less severe than that. And then after that contractionary period, there's going to be a trough where the country seems to start getting better. It's not going down as fast, and then it comes back up to an expansionary period, and then the whole thing repeats. And you can kind of see how there's a median line in the middle. That's kind of how an economy is growing throughout the time. And the graph is compared to real GDP and time.
Okay, so here we have measuring inflation in terms of CPI. So first we have CPI, the definition, which is the most commonly used measurement to identify periods of inflation or deflation by examining the weighted average of a market basket in a given year of goods and services. So for our equation, we have CPI equals the price of the market basket over the price of the market basket in a base year times 100. So for my example, I have 5 sandwiches, 2 pairs of jeans, and 2 books. And in the base year, they're marked at prices of $6 each, $35 each, and $4 each. Now if we take a look at the current year, you can see the prices are inflated or marked up to $7 each for the sandwiches, $45 each for the jeans, and $6 each for the books. So for my overall equation of CPI, I have my market basket at the base year prices multiplied by the number of sandwiches, jeans, and books provided, and I have $108. For my current year prices, I have the same type of fluidity, 5 times 7, 2 times 45, and 2 times 6, which I got from the inflated prices, which equals $137. So my overall CPI, after putting 137 over 108 times 100, is 127. So, although CPI is a commonly used measurement to identify periods of inflation, it does come with a lot of problems and 3 known biases. The first one is the substitution bias, And the substitution bias is basically when consumers buy less of a product in a market basket if the price of that product increases and they, let's say, want to substitute for a cheaper product. So here we can see that the CPI may be higher overall than what the actual consumers are buying because what they may be buying might be cheaper. The next is new products, and the newest products are not included in the current market basket, basically meaning that CPI measures, as we know, only prices in that year, not basically an increase in choices, which can well around evolve over time. The last one is the product quality, and basically meaning CPI ignores changes in product quality over time. And as we know, quality evolves every day. And for the CPI's case, it does not take into consideration the product improvement. So there's different variations, and there are 3 main biases, but that is overall how you measure CPI. So next we have our next biggest concept, which is what is inflation? And inflation is basically the rising general level of prices over a given amount of time. And we looked at it in class as the reduction of the purchasing power of money, meaning each dollar of income buys fewer goods than before. So next we have the CPI versus GDP deflator. So as we know, the GDP deflator measures the prices of all goods and services produced domestically, so within the United States, while the CPI measures the prices of only goods and services bought by consumers. So this excludes both purchases by firms and governments. So the 2 main differences I saw were that GDP is not, or the GDP deflator is not based on a fixed basket of goods as the CPI is, and the GDP doesn't change based on consumption as CPI does. So another thing that I found was that CPI is a more accurate reflection of the change in the cost of living. So now this is a basic overview. We've learned the biases, but overall we can see that it's a more accurate reflection. So more specifically diving into the concepts of nominal versus real GDP, we have nominal income, which is unadjusted for inflation, and it's expressed in money terms, measured in current dollars, unlike real income, which is measured in constant dollars, so not current amounts which you're given on your paychecks weekly. It's measured the purchasing power of G&S, or goods and services, after a period of adjustment for inflation. So unadjustment and adjustment. And I found that the biggest difference between the 2 was that real income is a measurement of the actual well-being of somebody's economic standpoint, since it is not the change necessarily in the money income, but more so the change in the purchasing power that that person possesses. All right, so the biggest question of all, is inflation bad? So we have 2 concepts, expected inflation and unexpected inflation. Expected inflation is when inflation is anticipated, so people know it's going to happen and people are prepared it's going to happen. For example, banks raise interest rates to compensate for anticipated inflation. So the 2 concepts that help control and minimize expected inflation include COLA and interest rates and inflation. So COLA stands for the cost of living adjustment, and it's basically when works have salaries that mirror inflation. So they basically negotiate wages that rise with inflation so individuals are not hurt by a sudden change in inflation or deflation. The next is interest rates and inflation. So we know nominal as the percent increase in money that a borrower pays not adjusted for inflation, and real as the percent increase in purchasing power that a borrower pays adjusted for inflation. So now we take a look over here at unexpected inflation. Unexpected inflation is higher than expected, so it ultimately hurts people, meaning consumers will often spend more time trying to protect themselves from inflation and less time trying to engage in productive activities and building companies, so it's overall just a big downer on the whole economic system. The chart that I created was the people that are hurt by inflation and helped. So let's start with hurt. So hurt are savers, employees, and fixed income individuals. And overall, what these 3 have in common is that they're basically the losers that will be paid back in dollars of reduced purchasing power, therefore losing money. The next is those that are helped, which are borrowers, employers, and variable income individuals. And through all of these, they are known as gainers, and they'll be paid back debts in dollars of reduced purchasing power. So they'll ultimately be gaining money through the process. So stick around next and we'll talk about asset price inflation. So in continuation to is inflation bad, we have asset price inflation, which basically states it's a rise in price of assets as opposed to ordinary goods and services. So typical assets include financial instruments such as bonds, shares, and other capital goods. And for example, we can look at it as an increase in the value of a capital asset for also something similar as we know as appreciation, which increases the value of assets such as real estate and housing markets and other capital goods like we talked about earlier. So over time, the asset prices increasing at an unexpected rate can ultimately overwhelm and disproportion our economic system if not taken care of as the problem occurs. So for our sample question for our is inflation bad section, we have which people are helped and hurt by unanticipated inflation. So we have number 1, a woman lends $300 to her sister in 1995 and has yet to be paid back. Is she hurt or helped? The next one is a man that borrowed $2,000 in 2001 and is paid back in 2006. Is this man hurt or helped by his situation? So for number 1, if you chose hurt, you are correct because the woman did lend her money, meaning she lost money over that period of time that she waited to pay her sister back. For number 2, if you chose that the man was helped, you're correct because he did borrow, so over time he did wait, but he ultimately gained a profit from waiting. So our next concept is unemployment, and unemployment occurs when a person who is actively searching for employment is unable to find work at the time. And that ties right into the unemployment rate, which is the percent of people in the labor force who want a job but are unable to find a job at the time, meaning they are still able and willing to work, but at this moment there are no jobs available. So included in the labor force are those that are above 16 years old, those that are able and willing to work, those that are not institutionalized, meaning they're not hospitalized or held in jail, and those that are not in the military, full-time school, or retired. So in differentiating between employment and unemployment, the employment workforce means that individuals are in the labor force and have a job at the time, so they're set. For the unemployment workers, on the other hand, it means that individuals are in the labor force but don't have a job at the time, and they're still looking. In terms of criticisms, there are also discouraged workers or discouraged job seekers, which account for those that are no longer working or looking for a job because they have simply given up. The next concept is self-employment rate, and just a little side note, in 2009, 1 out of 9 workers were counted as self-employed. So this basically means that they're in charge of their own income and are genuinely in and out of work depending on the economic standpoint at the time. We can see and misdiagnose, of course, the unemployment rate as they are not counted accurately as active members in the labor force 100% of the time, so that's why they're always accounted for as criticisms. So now we're going to be talking about types of unemployment. Our first type of unemployment is frictional unemployment, meaning that people are either in between jobs or they're sometimes fresh out of school in this case. They are also temporarily unemployed, as we know, but in general they are qualified workers with transferable skills and just aren't working yet. So for one of the examples, I'm going to use a medical student who's fresh out of college and is in search of a practice to join. She's kind of in that in-between stage, which we know as frictional unemployment. And another one is a sales rep who was let go and is now in search of another job. So our next type of unemployment is structural unemployment, meaning that workers don't have transferable skills and these jobs will never come back. In other words, their skills are now obsolete, and these workers must learn a new skill. But if that skill is not inhabited in the proper way, this is also known as creative destruction, meaning that they have experienced a permanent loss in their job. For example, of these 2 characteristics, I chose carriage makers and newspaper delivery boys because we all know at this day of age those are kind of out of the equation. The next type of unemployment is seasonal unemployment, which is a type of frictional unemployment that allows for unemployment due to the time of year and the nature of the job. The good news, the job will come back. So examples of this type of unemployment are, for example, the Easter Bunny, which only shows up every year, and river rafting companies in Canada due to the wintertime. The final type of unemployment is cyclical unemployment, which is unemployment that occurs from economic downturns, for example, recessions, in relation to the business cycle. Cyclical unemployment occurs as the demand for goods and services falls, meaning the demand for labor falls and workers are fired. In my example, Olive Garden stops baking breadsticks and loses a large customer demand, therefore creating poor sales and allowing for the owner to fire waiters as a result of the breadstick recession. The next concept is full employment, and full employment accounts for both structural and frictional unemployment, but not for cyclical unemployment. Economists agree that an unemployment rate of around 4 to 6% is considered full employment. Together, both this rate, in addition to the unavoidable variance as we stated above, frictional and structural unemployment, all make up the natural rate of unemployment, also known as NRU. Okune's law states that when unemployment rises 1% above the natural rate, GDP falls by about 2%. So in conclusion, it is impossible for full employment to be at 100%, as people are always being fired, laid off, joining new job companies, as demonstrated in day-to-day life.
So for our first sample question, we have, why is Martha, a stay-at-home mother of 5, considered not to be in the labor force? To answer the question, although Martha has the ability to work, she willingly chose not to and is therefore not included in the labor force, because in order to be included, you have to be both willing and able to work.
Alright guys, thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed our project and learned as much as you could out of this video.
Good luck on your finals.